Thank you guys for tuning into the Onnit podcast. We are joined by none other than my man, Dr. Dan Engle. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here. I've got the advanced reader copy of the Concussion Repair Manual and super pumped to have you. You know, I've been a fan of yours. I've listened to you way back in the day on the Warrior Poet podcast.
Early days.
Early days. Heard a lot of good things, and I'm very excited to have you here
Awesome.
in Austin.
Yeah, it's good to be back. Always good to be back.
Yeah. So it's been a little while since you've been out here, yeah?
Yeah, last time I was in was for Aubrey's Go For Your Win launch.
Oh, yeah.
Geez, year and a half goes by, or a little over a year goes by pretty fast.
It does. 2017 has been a rocket ship for me. But all good things. So being mindful of the fact that you've done quite a few of these, and listeners that listen to the Onnit podcast probably have heard you on the Warrior Poet, but I do want to touch on kind of your origins and where you started in medicine, what got you into these things, and then we'll touch on your own personal background with TBI.
Awesome. Yeah, I originally didn't plan on going to medicine. I went to college to play soccer, actually 3 miles from here at St. Ed's.
Okay.
Yeah. And played competitively throughout college, played competitive soccer for better 20 years. And that kind of leads into the Concussion Repair Manual. So fell into medicine, thought I would do surgery or ER medicine, really hands-on, fix-it kind of style. And then 2 weeks before medical school, dove off a pier, broke my neck, C5, started med school in a halo. First 3 months, not subtle way to start. My med school ID badge for 4 years was me in the halo, which is just a rad way to meet like patients in the hospital. They were like, holy shit, you've been through something. And then through that whole process, being in the halo and having that near death, so to speak, experience, it really changed my trajectory. So I ended up going into psychiatry and neurology, was really curious about spinal cord rehabilitation and the humanistic side of the experience of becoming a new version of ourselves, learning about ourselves the whole time. You know, this one precious life in this monkey suit. We get the opportunity to continuously reinvent ourselves, continuously look in the mirror, continuously do the personal development work like you and I were talking about before. There's always more to know. Mm-hmm. There's always more to do and grow. And that kind of unique experience in the humanness of this is what drew me to psychiatry. So I did psych, child psych, forensic psych, and after I was done, I didn't really like the training, so to speak. I didn't like the pharmaceutical kind of symptom management style.
You got this issue, take this pill.
Right.
We got a pill for that.
And, you know, I bastardized Western medicine for a long time. And now I appreciate that it has its place. You know, when I broke my neck, I didn't go see my herbologist. I went to the ER. And so in Western medicine, we do ER crisis management really well. And so there are times when pharmaceuticals are helpful, like with severe mania or severe psychosis. Even with severe depression, anxiety, there are other things that we can do besides pharmaceuticals. And so I opened up a clinic in integrative psychiatry, had that going for about 3 years in Portland. But there was still a sense that something else was there. I mean, it was good work. We were having great results, but it wasn't quite the soul of it, quite the juice. And then I was introduced to ayahuasca. And after that, it was very clear what my path was going to be.
Yeah.
And
you weren't just, sorry to cut you off, but you weren't just introduced. You kind of went balls deep down that path.
Yeah, that first entry point was so clear that I had gotten in touch with something that had also gotten in touch with me at a soul level that I hadn't experienced before. And in one weekend workshop, I learned more about myself than in 1 decade of psychotherapy. And after that, not being married at the time, not having kids, being really flexible, having an adventurous spirit, I pretty quickly closed up my practice and made my way down to the jungle. Lived in the jungle for a little over a year to study the medicine because I was really curious, like, wow, this is such a fascinating experience. This is such a fascinating science. And this science has been alive in these traditional cultures in the Amazon River basins for hundreds, maybe thousands of years. There are unbroken lineages that go back to ayahuasca's inception. And so I was really curious to understand like their cosmology and how they work with the plants and how the forest is their pharmacy and their grocery store and their hospital and their place of worship, and it is completely enveloped in all aspects of their culture. And I did go pretty balls deep, and I married the medicine essentially. Didn't think I was going to come back. Didn't plan on coming back. Didn't really want to come back. It made the most sense of anything I'd ever experienced. And so over the course of that year, getting more and more clear with how I might be of service back to the collective, so to speak, and doing a series of dietas, which are deeper dives with specific other medicines where ayahuasca opens the door and you work with specific other plant master teachers. And it was clear that being in a jungle hut off grid probably wasn't going to be my biggest opportunity to serve back.
Yeah.
And so now full spectrum medicine is the platform that is the bridge between the allopathic medical community and the psychedelic medicine community, so that when we are able to legalize and formally reinstitute these medicines into the fabric of our medical mainstream, we will see a renaissance in the entire field of psychiatric care. That's our charge. Concussion repair and TBI recovery is one aspect of that. And I also experienced that kind of firsthand too, after 6 or so pretty severe concussions and having part of my brain work pretty well to be able to get me through med school and residency and a lot of post-grad training, but still recognizing that there was still more work to do. So I started to amass all of the research that I put into the manual because I wanted to know the best of the best technologies and therapeutics, because when I was going through my TBI recovery, the docs and the neurologists and the attending physicians I was working with at the time, they were like, yeah, we hope it gets better. Go home and rest. Don't knock your head again. That was like the summary statement. I'm like, well, I'm probably going to knock my head again because I do like the sports arena, and I can't believe you guys are a field of neurologic care that doesn't appreciate that the brain is plastic. There is neuroplasticity. There is a constant opportunity to evolve and grow. And I'm fascinated by the fact that we don't have good technologies. Of course, this was like 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So I started studying it, put myself in the lab, came up with the best of the best, so to speak, that helped me and that helped other friends, family, and clients that I put through these protocols. And we want to be able to have the data available so that when people are going through the process of trying to get their head back on and their brain back online, and sometimes it's them going through the experience, sometimes it's friends and family going through the experience and trying to support them. Oftentimes they just want to know, what are the treatments that work? Because my doc is saying that we don't really have good options. And I don't get the sense that that's true. I get the sense like maybe they just don't know.
Yeah, there's quite a bit they just don't know.
Right.
You know, what do they get? Like 1 chapter out of their 4 years on nutrition.
Yeah,
So there's not a huge...
I got, I think, 8 hours of nutrition in 4 years of medical school, and that's a great example of something that anybody can do, complete nutritional overhaul that does stimulate neuroprotection, so it helps to prevent concussions, and it also stimulates neuroreparative mechanisms, so it helps to repair the damage that's been done.
100%. Yeah. I want to dive into how you lay out in this book, because as I was reading it, I was blown away that, first, having fought in the UFC for 8 years and had my own TBIs, not on the level of yours. And I want to paint a picture real quick to backtrack what a halo looks like. It's not this neck brace you see like in Law and Order or some shit, or People's Court, where the guy limps in and fakes his neck injury. I mean, you had screws in your fucking neck.
Yeah,
right?
these what these guys,
and this thing went all the way up to your head.
Dimples are. Yeah, they have this there's a titanium, looks like a horseshoe. It's open in the back and closed all around the front, and they screw 4 bolts into your skull, one in kind of either side frontal bone and either side occipital. And that horseshoe it's a titanium horseshoe, and it's anchored by 4 titanium rods into a chest plate and a back plate.
So there's zero movement.
You can pivot at your hips and nothing above.
Oh, yeah.
That 3 months.
I think that tells people, it paints a little bit better picture of because, you see like, all right, he's got the neck sling on or whatever. It's like, no. Like you dove, how far did you dive?
It was about 15 feet above water into knee-high water.
Into knee-high water.
Yeah.
Head first.
It was in the Gulf of Mexico, which I've fished in the Gulf of Mexico since I was a kid. I can't believe, in retrospect, I have no freaking idea what I was thinking. I've never dove into water with my hands behind my neck, and I did that. I never even dove in a pool like that. And I've never dove into the Gulf of Mexico off a pier. It was just one of these weird things that I guess was ordained in some kind of capacity because it's so unlike anything that I would have done before. I wasn't high. I wasn't drunk. I was very stone cold sober. And I just happened to hit a sandbar, an oyster reef that was on a sandbar that was knee high, and it felt like I got hit by a truck. But I had all my faculties. I had just come off of college off season, so I was about 20 pounds heavier now, probably 25 pounds heavier then than I am now, 17-inch neck. And so with that kind of stability, with a lot of cushion, as well as having a fairly large spinal canal, thankfully where C5 crushed, it didn't impinge the cord. So I had all my faculties. So I, dazed and confused, climbed back up on the pier, walked back all the way home. It was about another quarter mile home. And by the time I got there, I must have looked like I was wrecked because the people I was staying with was like, holy shit, stop, don't move. We'll call the EMS. And they thought I was going to be fine too. But once they took the x-ray, they're like, whoa, you've got two options. We can internally fix you, which means they put steel plates and rods along the vertebral column, or we externally fix you with a halo. And I was like, well, if you don't have to cut my neck, then don't do that. I can take a brace because I'm used to wearing braces, and that's like the coolest brace ever.
It's the
By the way, it's the best thing to do. Like time. If you walk into, I can't think of a better unless you were lit on fire. I can't think of a better way to clear the crowd in a very like crowded sardine-packed bar. Like we would still go out to 6th Street and I had the halo on and people would just like it was like Moses parting the Red Sea all the way up to the bar.
Get this guy a drink.
Totally.
ASAP.
It was yeah, there were some fun stories in the halo.
Oh, that's
But
awesome.
it finally slowed me down and totally gave me a really different trajectory in life.
Changed the path.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into some of the stuff that you have in here. One thing I want to mention to people, for everyone listening, that's like, well, I've never had a fucking concussion. What does this have to do with me? There is so much in here that benefits cognitive function in general. And we all can do better with cognitive function. I mean, how many people have brain fog or lack of memory? Or, you read a book and you don't have the recall. You don't feel like you've actually digested and processed that information.
Most people who have concussions don't think they have concussions because they equate concussions with loss of consciousness. And the vast majority of concussions don't have that. So a lot of people who are going through the brain fog kind of post-concussion don't appreciate the severity of it. And the cool thing too about the technologies and therapeutics that you're mentioning in the book is even if you don't necessarily have a quote-unquote severe TBI, all of these neuroreparative techniques and tools and technologies, they also help good brains become great, not just like injured brains become good again. So there's a great opportunity for us to accelerate our cognitive performance better than we thought we were able, because a lot of people don't realize that maybe they're limited and they could become quite a bit better, sharper, more focused, better recall, ability to shift sets or have all these executive functions really online.
Yeah, better management of emotional faculties.
Totally.
How you deal with stress throughout the day is a big one that we talk about fucking maybe more than people like on this show and on the Facebook Lives, because everyone deals with stress. Everyone deals with challenges, and life continues to throw those things at us no matter who you are, no matter how much wealth you have, no matter which part of the world you live in. We all have to deal with these challenges. And I think having better wherewithal and being grounded and understanding that we can operate better, we can get more out of life. And there's so many amazing techniques in here. So let's jump right in. In the beginning, you kind of break things down into different sections. And you talk about some of the different sections. And the primal sections, I was blown away by how many of these I had just fallen into by chance, if there is such a thing, and really utilizing the technologies for different things. When I got into floating, I just wanted to meditate better and I wanted to go deeper. And then turns out there's a huge cognitive benefit there as well.
Totally.
So let's talk about some of those piece by piece and what are some of the ones that you've really gravitated towards and personal favorites.
I like thinking of it on level systems. Like, so what are the level 1 protocols, level 2 protocols, level 3 protocols people can opt into? And level 1 protocols are all the primary technologies, like you mentioned. And I think of it too as like the things that essentially foster life. And those are universal. It doesn't matter if we're four-legged species, two-legged species, winged, swimming ones, all the same. Water, light, food, nutrition, water, light. I know I was going to do this because you kind of like hit me on it, which is good. Oxygen, water, light, food, and electromagnetics or energy, pulse electromagnetic systems. And each of those can be optimized. Our breathing oxygenation patterns can be optimized. Everything from Wim Hof practices to hyperbarics, right? So hyperbarics are oxygen on steroids, so to speak. And when you hyperoxygenate the tissues, you increase vascularity, angiogenesis, you get better circulation, you get better function. And it's kind of the same thing with water technologies. We can talk about hydration, and then we can also talk about like the therapeutic use of water technologies like flotation therapy or colonic hydrotherapy, which is detoxing the entire system of all of the residue that oftentimes happens when the brain goes offline after concussion and can't tell the rest of the body how to optimally function.
Yeah.
So when the master glands...
I do want to jump in on that real quick. I had my first colonic out at Spirit Ranch a little while back, and I had my reservations about it, that some people say, oh, that's nonsense. And I was open to it, but wasn't sure what I'd get from it. And, the people there had mentioned like, hey, if you feel really slowed down and bogged down, that's a really good indicator that you're doing some heavy detoxing after the fact. Yeah. And I was fucking floored the rest of the day. I mean, I got out so much. They call it raging brown because you can watch it coming out in the tube. But I mean, yeah. And then after that day, I had incredibly deep, restful sleep and just felt fucking lighter everywhere. Lighter in my thinking, lighter in my body and my movement, lighter in yoga, like a weight had been lifted. Yeah. So there's quite a bit of benefit there. And that was just my first time. Obviously, you can dive a bit deeper, getting more consistent with those technologies.
Yeah, there's the portal circulation that connects the colon with the liver. And when we're cleaning out the colon, we're essentially like getting a highway to decongest the liver. And the liver's holding all the toxic residue. The body does too, the fascia does too, the lymphatic system does too. There are a lot of different ways to detox. And there is a lot of controversy around the need to detox. Like, aren't we just self-detoxing machines? Hasn't that gotten us to this point? Yes. And are there things that we could do better to support the system? Yes. And part of that reason is because there are something like 200,000 new chemicals introduced into the environment every year. And less than 1% of those is tested for safety, right? So we have a toxic exposure on the planet that we've never known in at least recent modern history. And the opportunity is to use the available technologies to help the body stay as clean and optimally functioning as possible. Colon hydrotherapy is just kind of one aspect of that. Another aspect that people are getting more into now is like near infrared saunas, right? Yeah. Sweating it all out. And we do that a lot in movement because we're staying optimally primed. We're in non-conventional weight training, and I put that in the book too because that's a way to get the vestibular system and the coordination back online. Sometimes it's a little bit more of an advanced tool if somebody's vestibular system is really wrecked and they need more of like a therapeutic intervention working with a skilled practitioner. So the variety of ways, again, to come back to like decongesting and detoxing the system, we were talking about water therapies and bringing it back to flotation. I don't think, other than the medicines, and we've talked about the medicines and you know how passionate I am about those, that's going to rehab the whole field of psychiatry when they're institutionalized. And I don't think there's another technology that I'm as excited about as flotation, because everybody can float. Doesn't matter how old you are, how young you are, how sick you are, how not, if you're on medications, if you're not, if you're this shape, this size, doesn't matter. Everybody can float. And when we're looking at benefit to risk ratio, particularly as scientists, we want to see, okay, what are the available technologies, therapeutics, interventions for a particular condition? What's the risk benefit ratio? And with flotation, it's exceedingly in the benefit. There's essentially no risk. And the upside, particularly when people do a stack, and what I describe as a stack of floats would be like 10 floats in a 2 to 3 week period. So you're floating 2 to 3 times a week for 2 to 3 weeks. And you're stacking the benefits and you're stacking the effect and you're resetting the entire neuroendocrine system. So how the neurology connects with the endocrine or their hormone system gets completely reboot. And the way that that happens is in the tank, and now you know because you floated, it's the first time since conception that we've been without environmental stimuli. Right? So the entire, like since we were conceived up until our first float, there's always environmental stimuli going on. There's gravity, there's sight, there's sound, there's smell, taste, there's tactile perception. In the tank, all that goes away. There's no gravity, there's no sight, there's no sound. It's really like dropping back into the void. And when that happens, it invites the system to find its center again in a much more accelerated way, because the brain's having to deflect less from the environment so it can drop in deep and quick. And through that process of getting retrained to find our center, get back in touch with our breath, also see what was just hiding behind the curtain because we're so distracted and doing other things and busy with other things. Now that stuff, that is my opportunity to get in touch with, comes online. So I start to process things that have been just driving my stress, driving my views, driving my irritability, driving essentially my view for life, my experience in life. All of that comes online, and I get to process that, get in touch with that, potentially heal that, or maybe integrate it as another aspect. I've had clients and friends repattern trauma work through going in the tank versus going into ceremony, right? Because those are just different technologies to get in touch with what's behind the curtain. And physiologically, it starts to shift the neurology from sympathetic overdrive to parasympathetic tone. So nervous system, sympathetic tone, right? So fight or flight. Parasympathetic tone, rest or relaxation. The nervous system is essentially a binary system, and you're not predominantly in one or the other. I mean, you're not predominantly both at the same time. You're in one or the other. Most people are driving, like you mentioned, sympathetic overdrive, tone,
everyone's
stress.
Go.
Right.
Pound that coffee first thing in the morning.
This starts to repair that. It starts to shift it. And the more we can stack that, the more that shift maintains out of the tank and into life. And then you do booster floats from there on, like once or twice a month, to just drop back into the sweet spot.
Yeah. One of the things that I've noticed in probably my first 3 floats was even having practice with meditation and things like that, and worked with the plants prior, my inability to shut my mind off when I first got in there. You know, there's this buoyancy. You're like, whoa, this is fucking weird. And then the mind wants to talk to you. It wants to start to filter and go through all the daily bullshit of, I should be thinking of this. And then you catch it like, oh no, wait, I'm supposed to be quiet.
Right.
You know, like that kind of thought process.
It's such a trip.
But once you release that thought process and you silence the mind, it's fucking liftoff. Like it is some of the deepest peace you can ever have. Mm-hmm. And truly the benefit can be there. And many people you talk to about that first experience they have where the light comes on or the whale noises or whatever it is, and they're like, holy shit, it's done.
Right.
You know, that 1 hour's up or 2
Right.
hours is up. Right. And they have no idea. Like this is just like that, it flew by in an instant. Mm-hmm. And that's that incredible deep peace that is lasting. You know, you come out of that thing and you feel like you're still floating.
Yeah.
You sleep like a baby. There's a lot to it.
Such a treasure to have that experience of recognizing when the mind silences, and the deep peace that comes from that. And then the reflection, like, wow, this doesn't happen very often in my mind.
Yeah.
Most of the time it's pretty freaking busy. It's used to scanning the environment and wants to keep us safe and control. It set us up to stay essentially safe our whole life. So when it goes quiet, it gets a little fidgety. Like, shouldn't I be doing something? Shouldn't there be something happening in the environment? And so it takes a while for that scanning to slowly peel away. And that's another benefit of stacking, because you just get more and more comfortable in that space. And the meditation isn't necessarily staying in that space, it's continuing to come back to it.
Yeah.
Like just training the mind to come back to quiet, stillness, presence. And sometimes it's just, you know, if I'm sitting quietly, my mind may never really shut off, but if I'm tracking it to come back to presence as quickly and consistently as I can, that's still doing the quote unquote work.
Yeah, it's the awareness. Dr. Ronald Siegel talked about this. I've mentioned it quite a bit on the Facebook Lives. I don't think I've mentioned it on a podcast yet, but he's a doctor at Harvard, and he I don't know if I say he wrote, he has a book on Audible that's just for Audible. It's part of the great courses, and it's on the science of mindfulness. And they talk
Nice.
about that as the research shows, you train the brain like a muscle. And the more in tune you get to just being aware, being the observer of your thoughts, that in a sense is a way that you can navigate back towards that stillness.
Yeah.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah. Well said. Totally agreed.
Yeah. Well, let's dive into some of these other ones. We have our first tier. What do we have in the second tier? There's some of these things that I haven't experienced, like transcranial stim, things like that.
Yeah.
Lasers and whatnot. Would you say that's generally used in? I know you mentioned the Glasgow scale. Would that be for more severe cases, or do they have a benefit for all?
Those are oftentimes, well, cold laser, particularly if we know where the trauma is, and the TBI research for cold laser therapy is still relatively young. There are a lot of new novel devices out there that are pretty cool. Like there's an intranasal light diode that goes essentially through, the light penetrates the sinuses through the cribriform plate into the inferior or kind of like underneath areas of the brain. So that's one way to get light in. Another way to get light in is red LED and near infrared light diodes that you can put on the back of the neck that shine light kind of up underneath the occipital ridge and into the brain. And then there's the third, which is a helmet that goes transcranial. And it appears that there is transcranial penetration because you're going through bony plates at that point. So it's like how much diffuse light is getting in there. And it appears that at least some is, because the early research shows benefit. I tend to be one of those guys where I like stacking therapies that make sense and work complementary to one another on top of each other, so we get accelerated change. So to that extent, I'm not a pure scientist. I want to know what the data is, and that's why there's, I don't know how many hundreds of references of science research in there, because I wanted people to have the data. But I'm not typically one that's going to study one thing at a time. I want to be able to prove the model, not just the method. So if we have a model of low-level laser therapy into the brain for restitution, then I'm going to probably use all three of those entry points: intranasal, suboccipital, and then transcranial. Because then we know at that point we're shining light into the brain to the best of our ability. And low-level laser therapy has decades worth of amazing research for a variety of conditions: inflammation, joint repair, wound recovery. I think the SEALs were using low-level laser therapy in the field with something upwards of like 40% improved wound recovery rates. So it's one of those treatments that it makes sense, right? So when we're talking about primary therapies or primal therapies, these are the things that stimulate life, that boost life. Light is one of those. The most basic would be like go outside, lay in the sun, get good vitamin D, right? And then we've got other forms of light, like the low-level laser therapy treatments. So anything that is using natural methods and then amplifying those in an effective way that the body's able to receive, then we're going to accelerate recovery. Pulsed electromagnetic fields are one of those same kind of technologies. The entire physiologic system, the entire universe, is made up of frequency and vibration. And when we have technologies that have sinusoidal waveform patterns that match the body's physiologic ability to accept, receive, and utilize that information, then we're going to accelerate wound recovery. Not every pulse electromagnetic field device is the same. Not every low-level laser light therapy device is the same. So that's where it gets into the nuance and the science that is also an art, which is understanding which technologies to use for what person in what order at what time, as well as what technologies under that umbrella are effective for a given person. Are there certain wavelengths for stimulating neurogenesis and neurorepair? Yes. Those seem to be 630 and 810, and potentially some in between, but those are the two that are most used, or 650 and 810. Those are the two that are usually researched. And I geek out on light therapy almost as much as I geek out on flotation therapy. It's amazing. Again, it doesn't seem, when we're looking at benefit to risk ratios, extraordinarily high in the benefit range. And we can stack it on other things. Like while somebody's getting an IV, they can be on lights. They could also be on a pulse electromagnetic field bed, because some of the beds that are most specific to people's physiologic waveforms increase what's called microcirculation and the oscillation of that microcirculation. 75% of the blood volume is not in the veins and arteries. And that's most of what I learned in medical school. 75% of the blood volume is in the microcirculation, in the really small vessels. So something like pulse electromagnetic fields stimulate that oscillation, that waveform, that kind of contractile experience in the microcirculation to get better blood flow. You can actually see that on dark field microscopy. That's also technology that's been around for decades, right? So when we're thinking of primary therapies, these are things that just, those primary 5 that I mentioned that stimulate life, everybody can do those and access those. And then that's level 1. Level 2 are what I call the interventional therapeutics. Usually that's some kind of technology or something else that requires a therapist or somebody driving it, like hormone replacement
therapy, right? And Joe Rogan's talked quite a bit about how, traumatic brain injury can really result into a shutting down of our own reproductive systems and the way that we produce our own testosterone.
Definitely does.
So it can be either a long-term change, or it can be something that is utilized as a crutch until we're able to produce our own stuff naturally again.
Yeah. It's fascinating and pretty significant to see how concussions affect the master glands of the brain, and how when those master glands are affected, the downstream effect is limiting optimal physiology throughout the rest of the body, right? So if we're looking at hormones and we think about the master glands in the brain, pituitary, hypothalamus, pineal, when those are weakened, then downstream it affects adrenal function, it affects thyroid function, it affects gonadal function. Those are kind of the 3 primary endocrine systems downstream. You can also think of the thymus and the heart. Those are also the pancreas. Those are also exocrine glands. But the 3 that we primarily test for supplementation or to therapeutically intervene on the body's behalf and kind of stimulate them to work again would be the adrenals, the thyroid, and the gonads. And so for that means ovaries and testes.
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack.
And hormones is unique. You can see somebody that says that they're a hormone specialist, and maybe they've gotten a few hours of CME credit at one of the conferences, but it's important to know that you're working with somebody that really knows how to do it well, how to do it mindfully, and then isn't necessarily setting people up to stay on hormones for life, unless that's what they require. Ideally, just like any intervention, including pharmaceuticals, we are desiring to intervene in a way that we're able to help relieve symptoms. And so hormonal dysregulation usually looks like, it depends on one of those 3, but the symptoms of hormonal dysregulation is typically something like fatigue, lethargy, low motivation, low initiation. Thyroid would be like constipation, low core body temperature because it affects metabolic rate. So we want to alleviate symptoms, but we also want to intervene in such a way that we're stimulating the body's natural ability and vital life force to heal itself. So we're bringing in a bit of a stimulus with the expectation that we'll be able to wean that over time. Maybe wean it to a much lower dose, and maybe the body will still require a little bit of support, particularly if, like for me, and I've seen this with a lot of clients as well, when you look at the brain scans of somebody post-concussed, it's very obvious that there is functional limitation. Like you see the big holes of functional capacity on something like a SPECT scan. It might be that the body's not going to completely be able to heal from that injury until those functional gaps are restored. Now, the body's also plastic, so it's going to recruit areas from around that injury site to try and come in and support. It depends on the degree of trauma, the degree of the concussed brain and the effects downstream. how much it's going to be able to rehabilitate on its own. So something like a third tier methodology, like hyperbaric oxygen, might be required. And HBOT, that's usually a pretty intensive treatment. You need to go to a facility, they've got a tank, you need to have a prescription and evaluation from a doctor, and usually it requires 20 to 40 treatments to have that increased vascularity, angiogenesis, and full brain recovery. And it can still happen. So when we bring these level 1, 2, and 3 tier methodologies into a concerted, mindful, but very thorough and well-tracked methodology, then we oftentimes see significant results. It's challenging, and this is essentially the reason I wanted to write the book, because I've lived the experience of having post-concussive syndrome and not being able to think straight and having massive extended periods of depression and hypersomnolence. I was actually diagnosed with narcolepsy and given like a cousin of Ritalin, which is an amphetamine, right? So you're essentially giving somebody like prescription amphetamine. Yeah. That's usually going to get people's attention. If they have low energy,
we'll keep you awake all day.
Right, I got something for you. And I was like, geez, that worked. So this is what it feels like to have your brain online? Yeah. So I was kind of sold, but after a couple of years, I saw the writing on the wall, which is, you're going to expect me to take this for life. That's not okay. So I wanted to research everything else. Like, how can we do something naturally where I'm not dependent on a medication? Because long-term use, particularly of the medication that I was on called Silert, has long-term negative impacts. And when we know that there are more effective methodologies, sometimes it does require a very strong intervention on the front side. So if we're able to do, and if somebody's able to access hyperbaric oxygen post-concussion, usually I say go for it. Do high-dose fish oil, some CBD, some low-level laser therapy, get in the tank, do hyperbarics, stack it all. Put the odds in your favor. So I wanted to write the book for a user's manual, because when you're not able to, I didn't want to write it as like a science manual. I wanted it to be user-friendly. Because when your brain's offline, it's hard to track. It's hard to be able to follow your protocol and see what's happening and is it working. And that's where something like a health coach is really helpful. It's akin to like somebody never knowing how to work out in the gym and going to a gym and then just trying to fumble around and kind of copy what everybody else is doing.
Yeah, I saw a back squat on YouTube. I think I can do it now.
Right. Oh, and oops, now I'm out for 6 weeks, and now I don't want to go back because that didn't work, and it screwed me up worse. So we want to use somebody who is, a health coach or some kind of interventionalist that works as a liaison and a bridge between the person going through the experience and their treating physicians or clinicians. And ideally, most of the time, it's friends or family trying to be in that position. And because there's there's not a whole lot of other options, that's usually what's required. And
those are the ones that see it first too. You know, like your loved one is not the same. You know, they're just not the same person. They're sunk with depression. They don't have the same light and love and energy that they used to. They can't think well, and that in turn bothers people. You look at dementia and Alzheimer's people and how angry they get when they forget something. It's because they can catch themselves in that, like, fuck, it's not working properly, right? And that in turn stimulates a fucking deep emotional response right away. And that's very hard to be on the front lines of that. So 100%, they take that role by necessity.
By necessity. And you just brought up the second big reason that I wrote the book. One was for myself. Third reason. One was for myself because I wanted to find the technologies that worked. 2 is for other people to be of benefit. And 3 is because I wanted to stack the odds in my favor that I wasn't going to have dementia down the line, because 3 out of 4 of my grandparents died with neurodegeneration. Both my mom's parents had severe Alzheimer's, and my dad's dad had Parkinson's. And I've seen up close and personal what neurodegeneration looks like. And it is not pleasant. It's not a good way to go.
It's a horrible way to go.
It is
We've had
terrible.
Alzheimer's runs on my father's side of the family, and I've seen it in close hand, and it's, Parkinson's, you're a prisoner in your own body. In Alzheimer's, you lose every memory you've ever had, or they start to cross wires, and you're thinking of, my great-grandmother called me Larry, who's her son, when I was 7 years old, and I was like, Daddy, why does she think I'm Uncle Larry? And he's like, you looked like him when he was your age. And it just fucking turned me upside down as a 7-year-old kid. Like, fuck, that can happen.
Right. That makes an impression.
Yeah. It can go that south. Like, I had no idea. But, we see diseases on the rise across the board. They're saying now that millennials have a shorter lifespan than their parents do. Alzheimer's is on the rise, and we'll dive into diet here as a segue, because one thing that got me into the ketogenic diet was reading Grain Brain from Dr. David Perlmutter, and the connection between excessive blood sugar and calling that type 3 diabetes, and really
Totally.
Let's jump into that, because I spent some time.
It's a good segue.
In doing a ketogenic diet, because I had heard that there was some cognitive benefit. This was after I retired from fighting, and lowering systemic inflammation, having increased endurance. And, I got into all that and experienced it firsthand. The deeper I went, the more I was like, fuck, my brain works for the first time in a long time.
Yeah, that was I kind of fell into that experience myself. This was 10 years ago, and I didn't know what KidoGenex was at that point. And I wanted to experiment with essentially a no-carb diet. And it was a little rocky kind of heading into those first few days and maybe a couple of weeks. But on the other side, I was like, oh, geez, I feel good. I feel clear, consistent energy through the day, because blood sugars started to stabilize and normalize. And there was a level of clarity that I hadn't experienced. And I wasn't doing anything else significantly different at that time. And so it was then, like a year later, when I actually started hearing the term KetoGenex, and I was prepping to write the book, that I think I heard something about KetoGenex and concussion recovery, and increased learning, cognitive enhancement, and stroke prevention. I was like, oh, well, that's interesting. Let me dive into that one a little bit further. And that's to loop back around. The reason I brought up Alzheimer's after you mentioned it was, we're seeing now the long-term implications of concussion, particularly with the NFL and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and that looking like an early Alzheimer's picture. And we know that concussion, particularly repeated significant concussion, increases somebody's response rate or prevalence of Alzheimer's in their lifetime, especially if they're genetically loaded with the APOE4 allele.
Yeah.
And you can get that tested and checked. It increases, so multiple concussions plus that positive genome profile increases your rate of Alzheimer's tenfold.
Damn.
Right. So if that's the case, if I know I'm in combat sports and I know I'm genetically primed and loaded, like I've seen that in my family history and it's showing up in my genetics, then I know I want to be doing something like some of these methodologies to protect my brain in that experience. And so KetoGenex, and being in a ketogenic state, the early science is showing that it has neuroprotective mechanisms in place. So if there is a blow, then the body's able to respond to it, or at least not have the inflammatory response on the other side that kicks in the cascade that leads to a brain bruise and what we know as concussion.
Yeah, longer term damage.
Yeah.
You can kind of shorten that window to recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in ketosis when I was fighting or playing football from age 10 to 22. But I definitely feel like, moving my way back into carbohydrate backloading, still, much lower carbohydrate than the standard American diet. I'd say, on any given day, it's under 200, most likely under 150 grams a day. But with that, I didn't feel like my body responded better with eating carbohydrates again. I didn't feel like there was a drop off or loss in cognitive function from leaving the ketogenic diet. And likely that's due to the amount of time that I spent doing that work. But there's a huge benefit there. And how many people play football? How many people get into combat sports? And how many people just have fucking freak accidents like you do? Or people get into car accidents all the time. And they're like, well, shit, I'm kind of unscathed. They got this little cut on my forehead, but it's no big deal. And then they can't sleep at night, and everything starts to kind of unravel for them.
Yeah.
But there's so much, given in your book.
Yeah.
And really, it extrapolates out into everything.
Yeah, and that point that you just made in regards to the transition from ketogenic into more carb liberal dietary profiles. It's a good example too. Like, I'm not necessarily advocating everybody be strict keto in order to get some of the brain benefits of a dietary profile that is going to be supportive for healing your brain. So it's kind of like being in the gym. Some people are going to like go all out, right? And do high intensity interval training every other day and stacked with like non-conventional weight training and bells and maces and bats and all kinds of, like, really go for it. And some people are going to do more like, hot yoga and bicycle riding and more like endurance training. Everybody's going to be a little different. So I encourage people to just experiment with KidoGenex and gradually. And I think Perlmutter's book is great. He's an example of a really forward-thinking neurologist. Daniel Ammons is another one. There are a few key forward-thinking neurologists that are showing some of the opportunities to bring new novel therapeutics into the medical mainstream. I bring up Daniel Ammons' work because he is the one that I'm most familiar with using the SPECT scans. He's got like he's got a database of like 100,000 brain scans. And these are the functional scans that actually show how your brain works. And this is the kind of technology that we want to see more consistently available for people who are going through these kind of protocols, because I've been working on my brain recovery for 15 years. And it was only recently when I got a brain scan I saw, there's more work to do.
So now, is this different from fMRI? Would this be something like, there's photos in the book of kind of like brainwave patterning? Would that be like alpha wave, theta wave, how we can tap into those things?
Yeah. So if you go, I think it's maybe right here. The SPECT scans are, when you see them in color, they look essentially like, the brain looks like a balloon. And it'll show sometimes holes in the post-concussive areas that, actually I don't see the exact picture right now, but I'll show it to you. And we'll maybe, if there's a link, we can show people like what an example is.
Yeah, we'll link to that in the show notes.
And show a usual colored version of a normal brain versus a concussed brain. And essentially, it looks like if you had, most people know what a brain looks like, kind of anatomically, and if it was like made out of tofu or jello, which essentially it is, and then you took a big bite out of it, that's what the scan is going to look like. Functionally, it has a bite taken out of it because that area is not working. Anatomically, thankfully, it doesn't have a bite taken out of it. So you still have brain tissue there, but we need to rehab that brain tissue. We need to get it, what we were describing before is angiogenesis, new neuronal growth patterns, stimulating things that encourage brain-derived neurotrophic factors and all the new growth phase factors that will increase neuronal growth and the repatterning of new essentially like highways in the brain. We want to see that activity come back. And the therapeutics that we're stacking here through level 1, 2, and 3 protocols all support that to varying degrees. Some are going to decongest the debris that happens after a concussion, and some are going to stimulate new neuronal growth. Those are stackable interventions, right? We would want both to happen. Yeah. Like if you were going to rehab an entire building, but you had to get the old building out of the way. You're going to go in, you're going to gut that building, get everything out that you're not going to want in there, and then you're going to rehab it, and you're going to bring in all the new technology so that the electrical system is working, the plumbing is working. The plumbing in the brain is like the plumbing in the body. The body's plumbing system, variety of different ways, venous return, lymphatic return. So lymphatic flow is essentially the lymphatic system takes inflammation and inflammatory debris from the soft tissue and funnels it to the kidneys and the colon to get out, to excrete. The brain has the same system. It's called the glymphatic system. That's essentially the highway that gets all of the debris out. Well, that system gets clogged when there's a concussion, and then everything backs up, and then you get the tau tangles and the neurofibrillary tangles and these tau proteins, these plaques. And that's what we see anatomically when somebody with Alzheimer's, their brain is looked at post-mortem. It's got these, like if you took a spider web and you just kind of like mangled it up, it's got all these like really screwed up cobwebs. and congested areas. So we want to get all of that debris out. Plus, we want to stimulate new growth.
Yeah. And just basic stuff. Sleep is an incredible.
Sleep.
It's
Totally.
absolutely incredible.
Absolutely.
For dusting off the cobwebs.
Yeah.
A lot of that is enhanced at those points. And it's
Completely.
absolutely terrible for people that work, shift work, things like that. When I was in the UFC, I wasn't making a lot of money, so I bounced and bartend on weekends, and I'd be up till 3:30 in the morning twice a week, just throwing off my circadian rhythm.
Yeah.
And never fully recovering from the week's workload of working out twice a day, things like that. But yeah, there's, you're stacking the cards against you when you're in a situation like that.
Sleep is totally underrated. I was just reading from Charles Poliquin, the strength sensei.
Oh yeah.
He was asked a question recently, which is, what do you think that people don't know enough about? He said sleep. And from a strength coach, I was like, oh, great.
And this dude knows fucking everything.
Right.
Like he'll do acupuncture. I think when Mark Bell had him on his podcast, he put a pen into his index finger as a trigger point, and all of a sudden, and this was right before a back squat, now Mark could open up his entire chest to get underneath the bar, activate his lats, and PR'd on squat. So this guy has a wealth of knowledge in many things. He could have gone down a rabbit hole on a ton of different things, but what was it? It was baseline, sleep, one of the most important things.
Right.
The most important recovery tool. The most important fat loss tool. Rob Wolf, one of my favorite quotes from him in the Paleo Solution was, if you're not getting enough sleep, you're cock blocking your fat loss. It's true.
Right.
It's totally true. All our sympathetic gets activated. We have fight or flight response. Cortisol goes through the roof. Ghrelin grows through the roof, the hormone that makes us hungry. So you have a poor night's sleep. The next day you're starving. Mm-hmm. There's a reason for that. The body's responding. It doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel comfortable. So, hey, if things aren't right on the home front, let's stack the odds in our favor. Let's store more fat. Let's eat more food. Let's make sure that we're okay if the shit hits the fan.
Yeah. Yeah, sleep is one of the necessary reboots to the system. And some people get concerned if they start getting hypersomnolent. And what I mean by that is not necessarily sleepy during the day, but sleeping longer after a concussion. I'm like, great. If it's not significantly impacting your relationship or your work or other aspects, if you just need now to sleep 12 hours, do that. And do that for like a month. And oh, by the way, don't knock your head again, especially in that month. Be mindful of the information you're taking in, because usually there's a lot of light sensitivity and noise sensitivity, EMF sensitivity, like cell phones up to the ear. All of a sudden now I've got headaches after I'm on the cell phone. Great, we'll get some kind of be on the speaker or get one of these. Not all headsets are wired the same.
Yeah,
some are
a lot of headphones you can get that have the little mic down here.
Right.
They're not going to be powered. They're powered by your phone. They're not using Bluetooth technology, buzzing by the ears and close to the brain, things like that. There's some easy workarounds. I think more people are getting in tune with and fairly cheap. $30.
Yeah,
and you'll hear and they'll hear you very clear, as opposed to a Bluetooth that cuts in and out.
And Bluetooth, if you have a Bluetooth kind of headset,
jawbone.
Right, and then you put up a Gauss meter to that, and you actually see how much EMF that's giving off. And a lot of people just walk around. I see guys, mostly men, walking around with their Bluetooth thing all the time, even when they're not on it.
Very important people.
Right, right. You got
No,
to see how important I am.
Next. Yeah.
I'm waiting all the time for this next call. Yeah, it's ridiculous, and a lot. That's mostly because people just don't know. So we just need to give people information and then let them make an educated choice. Like once you know, if you still want to do that, great. But if you don't know, then it's kind of our job, particularly as scientists and neuroscientists, to let people know what are the potential risks, and then what are the things that you can do if you have had an injury.
Yeah, 100%. Well, we talked a little bit about the ketogenic diet, and I want to stick on that because something that I've mentioned quite often is the benefits of fasting. And for people that don't want to commit 8 weeks to cutting out carbohydrates, an excellent entry point is fasting. And it can be done, there's a great book, The Complete Guide to Fasting, written by Jason Moore and Dr. Jason Fung and Jimmy Moore. And they talk about all the different ways you can fast through intermittent fasting, doing a 16-hour fast with an 8-hour eating window, all the way to just cutting out food for a 24-hour cycle, like the warrior diet, and then, taking longer breaks, which really would stimulate apoptosis and autophagy and really a lot of cellular health and regeneration and just clearing out those cobwebs. Dive into some fasting talk here, because I know you've had quite a bit of experience with it.
I have. Yeah, I ran a fasting clinic kind of in this intermittent window between when I had my clinic in psychiatry and then I moved to the jungle for a couple of years. This was at a center down in southern Arizona. And it's amazing to see the cellular rejuvenation, the chronic disease repatterning that happens through fasting. And I'm glad to see more and more of the science coming out. I'm starting to see more and more of like people in the lead medical literatures speaking about the benefit of fasting. It's one of those tools that everybody can do. So we put that in the primary therapeutics, like everybody can do that. And it depends on who that person is and what their lifestyle is able to utilize. I personally, because I tend to have a metabolic rate that's pretty high, I don't store a lot of fat, I get a little edgy if I go through like a week-long fast. I've done that a handful of times, and it's amazing the level of clarity that comes through that process. But I tend to be pretty darn tired. So it's not something I'm typically going to be able to do if I'm trying to work at the same time. But if I have a concerted time where I've got a week and I really just want to have a reboot time.
Yeah, if you can get into nature, take some time off, even 3 or 4 days.
Yeah,
have
do
tremendous
a digital
benefit.
detox, have some books, go into the woods, come out a week later. Usually feel amazing. There's different types of fasting: water fasting, juice fasting, liquid fasting, food fasting. Water fasting tends to be a bit stronger. It can be also a bit more depleting because it starts to demineralize the system over time. So if people do water fast, I usually just say, well, great, then add some sea salt or something in there to remineralize. Juice fasting, usually the diets that we found that are easiest for most people are the liquid fasts. So that's usually something like broths, real thin soups, and green juices. So you're still getting some calories throughout the day. You're getting
a little bit of protein, very easily digested and assimilated.
But it's under 300 to 400 calories a day. So you're still in that significant fasting period, and you're able to just support the ease of it a little bit further. And then food fasting would be more something like if you were doing intermittent and your regular diet, you could do a 14 to 16 hour window, right, of no food, and then 6 to 8 hour, 10 hour window of food. And then you did that, and that's kind of like an easy maintenance. Great. Well, then add to that once a week a 24-hour window where you're not doing anything. Mm-hmm. And with those two combined, you're really going to accelerate the change about as close as you would do if you were doing a week-long, twice-a-year fasting. If it's not necessarily like if you could just do the additive time in the fasting, like if I'm adding up this 16-hour
all
window,
the hours you didn't eat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not quite like that, but it's pretty close, and it's much more manageable for most people. Like, great, then I take the proverbial day of rest on Sunday, no food, and then my preference is 14-hour windows. If I do 16 hours, I typically have a bit of a lag, whether it's in the morning or in the evening. And that's my sweet spot. And I can do that as a maintenance. And everybody's going to be a little bit different.
Yeah, and that just takes trial and error, practice, and fine-tuning what's right for you. Because as we've said 1,000 times, there's no one-size-fits-all diet. There's no one-size-fits-all workout protocol. But really, it's about playing and having the discipline to do these things and experiment with yourself. And
to stay with the experiment, even if it's uncomfortable. So if somebody's going to try on a new diet, I usually encourage them to try it for a month to get over the humps that are naturally going to come, and then to reset the metabolic rate, to reset the kind of the hunger cravings, to recognize that a lot of time people are hungry, they're actually thirsty, and they just need to increase their water intake. And then to have these little tweaks, and then maybe add a few things to their diet that they weren't adding before, like seaweeds, which have great minerals, or salt, or broths. And so therefore you can get into a longer kind of like intermittent window during the day of eating. And then you have enough time, if you're going to like dedicate a month, to tweak it and see if it's going to work, versus doing it for a week and saying, oh, that thing didn't work.
Yeah. I tried the ketogenic diet for 4 days and it wasn't right for me. Like,
Exactly.
that's the fucking hardest part, buddy.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah, I really like that you touched on some of these superfoods, and I think with marketing and, the current way the world works and social media that, you find a fucking superfood protein bar and you're like, oh, this has, a gram of moringa in it. So it's a superfood bar and it's got 40 grams of sugar. But there are, moringa being one of them, a lot of superfoods out there. And I think by adding some of these things back into our diet, like bone broth, organ meats being an incredible resource for people.
Yeah, you're talking about like the earliest superfoods.
The earliest superfood. And, diving in, we touched on genetics and things like that. My wife and I did our genetic profile and we found that we can't take vitamin A from, so beta carotene from carrots and sweet potato and convert that into usable retinol. We can't have a usable form of vitamin A from plants. We have to get that from meats. It has to come from egg yolk. It has to come from organ meat. And the same thing for a lot of people with all the different forms of iron, but heme iron is the most bioavailable form of iron and it's highest in organ meat. Mm-hmm. All the methylated, most bioavailable forms of B vitamins are in organ meat. There's just a wealth of things, and a lot of these fat-soluble vitamins and minerals like heme iron, your body can store them. They can stockpile them. So it's not like, shit, I got to eat this every night now. It's like, no, just include it once a week. You have that once a week, that's going to have a lasting effect on your body throughout the week. And it's more satiating, so you do feel, even if you are, we talked about that with the ketogenic diet, you can be full longer. You can go without food longer. You're not a slave to the clock. Like, it's been 2 hours. I got to eat something, but adding these superfoods back in can really pay dividends in how you manage your diet and how you can manage that window of, I feel okay going 16 hours today. And then I'll have a couple meals. It's not like the feeding window starts and I'll just eat for 8 hours straight,
You brought up a couple of amazing things there, which is we have the technologies to do our genetic profiles and to get more clear on what are the ideal supplements to take, what are the ideal food approaches to use. And to recognize too, and I've been in this position where I was raw vegan for 5 years when I was running this clinic. I was telling you about this fasting clinic. And I was so committed to the exclusion of my body. My mind, my heart, my spirit was so committed to this raw vegan path. And my body was getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And I was taking sometimes $600, $700 worth of supplements a month, just trying to keep up.
Just to manage.
I know I can crack this. I know we can do this. I just got to get over it. And then 5 years later, I'm like, I think it's time. And the first time I had, I broke that 5-year fast, because essentially a raw vegan diet is a fast.
It's a form of a fast for sure.
Yeah. So I broke that fast with an egg, and my body just went through this whole wave of energy, excitement, gratitude. It was the most religious moment I've ever had with food. And I realized, oh my gosh, maybe I don't know if I realized it then, but shortly thereafter, I realized I've been in a dogma. Yeah. I've been in a belief system that this particular path was the only path that was right for me, as opposed to saying, this is something I'm going to do for now. I'm going to try it, and it's going to be beneficial, and I'm likely going to loosen up my relationship with it if it's no longer working. Because that time was very good for settling my mind and helping me get in touch with meditative practices and being more spiritually open, so to speak, and whatever that means. For me, it was really an awakening time. And it was helpful to go away from meat, because now I eat meat now. And when I do, I try and be as mindful as I can.
Yeah.
Where my meat comes from, eating meat in the best way I can, really having the gratitude for the opportunity to eat meat, because not everybody does or can, just at a whim, go to the grocery store and choose whatever food we want. I mean, we have so many luxuries in our everyday life. We are so normalized to them, and we become it becomes just automated. And so it's how many different ways can we offer ourselves the opportunity to slow down and get in touch with gratitude. And sometimes that's through these big healing opportunities, like a concussion. the concussion, the first severe concussion I had, well, it didn't really slow me down that much. The first time I ever slowed down was wearing the halo for 3 months. That was like finally something slowed me down. And it started to get me more in touch with gratitude for life, right? And so when people hear that I broke my neck, and like, oh, wow, you're lucky, but wow, that must have been hard. I'm like, yeah, it was actually one of the best things that ever happened, because it really got me in touch with like the preciousness of our healthy bodies, and the fact that we're in control of fairly little. Like, I could get cut off by 18-wheeler driving out of the parking lot on the highway.
Barangi.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and people in our immediate family that we know, crazy stuff happens, and crazy stuff may happen to us too. And if it does, may I accept that as hopefully medicine for my soul, and be able to meet that with as much courage and dedication and humility. And I firmly believe that crisis precedes transformation every time. And if we're in many, because I work in the field of mental health and spiritual practices and like plant medicines and like all this stuff, so many times people are either asking for a transformative experience and maybe not knowing that there's going to be a crisis that comes before that to kind of stimulate us out of our usual way of relating to the world. It gets us out of our comfort zone. And there's a great spiritual teacher called Muji in Portugal, and Muji's fond of saying, don't build your house on sand. I mean, like, everything shifts. Life is transient. Life is moving. It's always changing. There's so little that we're in control of. And if something does come in that snaps us out of our comfort zone, then maybe it's opening up us to something else that's just around the corner.
Oh, man. Dr. Dan, thank you so much, brother.
Totally.
This has been my favorite podcast, and I've had many, many good ones thus far.
Awesome.
Where can people find you? You know, where can people look into you? Do you have a website, social media, things like that?
Yeah. Given the fact that we're talking about the Concussion Repair Manual, so the website is concussionrepairmanual.com. The platform that I mentioned before about full spectrum medicine, essentially being the anchor point between the current Western psychiatric community and the psychedelic medicine community, that platform is fullspectrummedicine.com. And then my personal website is drdaningle.com.
Perfect. We'll link to those in the show notes for for people listening in, so you don't have to jot this down while you're driving. And are you on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, any of that stuff?
I am on Facebook and Twitter. I don't check my Twitter account probably as often as might be helpful. So there's the constant reminder to get in the social media scene. You know, in some ways, I'm still fond of being in the jungle and being super simple. So coming out, so to speak, like online and above board now is an exciting time. And there's the constant like, oh yeah, it is helpful to check in with the social media arena. So I'm here to help make that commitment with you to do that more
Discipline,
mindfully. Yes.
Consistency.
Totally.
Consistency
It is
makes
so much
the
about
change.
consistency. Totally. Slow change is lasting change.
100%, brother.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us, and
it's been
we
a
look
pleasure.
forward to having you back on as soon as you're available.
Awesome, Kyle.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, man. All right.